Hi, I wanted to welcome you to the Divorce Planning Podcast. I'm Carri Goldring, and I'm in the mortgage business, and I do planning pre-divorce for people who are either going to refinance their home, do an equity buyout, or plan to purchase a new home and make sure that everything in the divorce decree is worded properly and the numbers in the planning is taken care of so that you can go through the underwriting process smoothly. And I would like to introduce you to other people who are interested in the divorce planning process so you can get a real education of what's involved. Hope you enjoy. Hi, today I have with me Cara Willings, who's a family law attorney, and I wanted to say welcome and to have you introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you, Carrie. So my name's Cara Willing. I'm a family law attorney in Genesee County, and I have a small practice where it is just my mom and I as the attorneys, and we have two paralegals and actually a cat who's in my office with me right now. But we practice primarily family law. I do a little bit of probate. We're located in downtown Flint, but we practice along the 23 corridor, so Livingston, Washtenaw, Genesee, and some Shiawassee County as well. Occasionally an Oakland County case if I really like the client, but that's my background with family law. I've been practicing for about 6 years, and I'm a State Bar of Michigan Family Law Section Council member and their recording secretary. And I also lead their webinars for the State Bar for continuing legal education and outreach to law schools to try to convince students to practice family law once they pass the bar. So that's kind of
That's
my
awesome.
background. Yeah,
It doesn't seem like a lot of people just generally pick family law. It seems like you more fall into family law.
definitely. Yeah, it's not as sexy as, like insurance defense where you're making buku bucks and that kind of thing, or, working for one of the many billboard people in the Metro Detroit area, but
Right.
it's interesting.
I bet. So today you and I are going to talk about gray divorce, which has kind of been the new thing, but I don't even know if a lot of our listeners know what that means. So I thought you could start with explaining what does gray divorce even mean and why or how is that different?
So there's not like an agreement as to when the gray part starts. It just means a divorce that's later on in life as opposed to, when your kids are younger, if you have children. But typically it's a divorce starting at about 55, 65, if you find other results. But just means a divorce later in life, possibly when you're close to retirement. Or your children are entering college or in college or are adults, so just kind of a when you thought your life was going to calm down and then all of a sudden everything changes.
And it's an uproar. And do you find when you work with people in the gray divorce that maybe it's more of a old traditional marriage where one party is taking care of all the finances and the household and the other party really doesn't know what's going on and they're almost at a disadvantage by not knowing?
Yes. Yes, a lot of the times those gray divorces that I have had come in, it's usually the wife was the stay-at-home mom, took care of the kids, the dad worked, and it seems like there's just this issue where uh, maybe the wife isn't used to the husband being at home all the time, or maybe they've been inspired, that they didn't want to live the last couple decades of their life with this person. And statistically, it is women in gray divorces who file more commonly than men do. So that is an interesting fact. But the cases that I've had, they've had traditional marriages. Maybe the wife knew something about the finances, but typically it was the guy who was in control of the money.
That's what I find too, and a lot of what I do is end up helping them understand the money situation or budgeting or banking or, whatever comes up. So are there things in a gray divorce that would be different than a regular divorce? I mean, I could think off the top of my head that there's no child support,
Right.
but maybe thinking someone might not be working anymore or soon not working.
Right. So there's a couple of like specific issues. Obviously, in any divorce, the issue of health insurance is a big deal, but it's an even larger deal when you are um, older. Maybe you're more dependent on doctors, depending on where your health is at. And Medicare covers some, but you're likely going to need some supplemental insurance. So when somebody who comes in and they're older and maybe they've had some health conditions, I do ask them if they've looked into health insurance and what that cost will look like for them. Or, there's always you can always get a divorce, but sometimes for health insurance purposes to stay on, I also recommend, a separate maintenance, which is where you're still legally married, but you get a document and it's basically like a judgment of divorce where you separate everything as if you've been divorced, but you can stay on the health insurance through your spouse's, company or wherever they're getting it from. But I do know that some companies have kind of cut back on that, and I'm guessing it's just because healthcare costs are so expensive. So,
That's
I do ask them if they have the ability to look into it. Like if I get a judgment of separate maintenance, can I still remain on, my husband's health insurance? So, health insurance is a big issue. And with a judgment of separate maintenance, there's usually a paragraph in there, like, let's say that you're able to find health insurance that's affordable, or you just no longer want to stay married. There's going to be a paragraph in there that says, the parties, maybe after like 10 years time, 5 years time, can petition the court and ask for this judgment of separate maintenance to be turned into a judgment of divorce. So, um, that's kind of step one is where I start with is always the health insurance,
that's important
yeah.
for sure. And then what happens if someone is going to retire but they don't have like pension, or one worked, one didn't, so Social Security is really different.
Right. So, a lot of the times in these cases that the parties have been married for decades. So, with like Social Security, you've been married 10 years, you've the option to either collect what you would have made on Social Security, what you qualify for Social Security, or, Social Security through your ex. But it has to be that 10-year amount. And sometimes people do get married later on in life, or they're on like marriage number 3, and technically it's a gray divorce, but they've been married 5, 8 years. So, if they're in my office, I'm honest with them. I'm like, can you do another 2 years? It
If
just
you were
depends.
working.
And that's, and people do take that to heart. It is a real consideration. Like, I think I could do 2 more years, but
And you
um,
can't count the second husband, huh? If you already were remarried, does that minus out the potential of collecting Social Security from husband 2 if you're on husband 3?
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking of a particular case right now that just came in, and it was actually her first marriage, but his third. But I guess, maybe you could, if you were married to husband number 2. Yeah, so with gray divorce, if you look up statistically, like the woman files, she wants her freedom. The husband doesn't want the divorce, but the husband is actually more likely to get remarried after the gray divorce than the woman is. So that's interesting. Um, but in the case that you just presented, yeah, the wife could have, gone for husband number two's Social Security, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure
I
she
think
could.
it is strange. And I know my mom wasn't, her last husband passed away, but when she had called Social Security about like widower Social Security, the Social Security person told her, because she was married for 10 years to my dad, like a million years ago,
She's like, if he passes away, you call me back. And I'm like,
Um,
really? You'll go back that far? Like that? Or if he retires, there's a potential that she could collect his Social Security if it's more. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. But I guess they still do that.
Wow, yeah, that is wild. But yeah, so there's the Social Security, there's different retirement accounts, and then there's the difference of, are they already drawing on their retirement or not? And the reason why that matters is for spousal support purposes. So if this is a long-term marriage, and there's different factors that go into spousal support, but um, if they're already drawing on their retirement accounts, it counts as income instead of splitting the retirement account. So it's either the income or it counts as
Asset.
basically an asset that you divide. So, and you can't double dip. You can't say, well, it's his income and it's, an asset. So it has to be one or the other. And so that's kind of the interesting thing with retirement accounts, and calculating that when you're kind of later on in life.
Yeah, that would be that would be tough. That would be tough. Um, Anything else that you can think of that's a major difference between the two,
Between being retired and not.
between gray divorce and like a little kid divorce?
A little kid divorce. Yeah, I mean, there are some other issues like with going back to the retirement accounts. When you're dividing retirement accounts, the the giant malpractice issue that attorneys are always concerned about is like if you are entitled to a portion of the retirement account and maybe you were entitled to so much money and you didn't you usually get the legal documents that divide the retirement accounts if they're not anyways, you get these legal documents done by an attorney, and they're sent off to the retirement company to put them on notice that, the ex is receiving this much of the retirement account. Well, if the other person passes away and that document was never submitted, they may be losing out on some of that money depending on how that was written up. So, there's more of a urgency to get those legal documents done. I don't know what it is. Like I draft some of the simpler ones because we have a lot of divorces through there are a lot of divorces where people work for GM here, and those are through Fidelity. And like a lot of people delay them, and I don't really know why, because it's, those are things that you're entitled to. It's a benefit to you, but they do cost money to have them drafted up correctly. So people don't want to, after they've just paid their attorneys, they don't want to have to pay another attorney. But there is
Right.
more urgency with getting those documents done the older you are, just because there's a higher likelihood that you're not going to be around as long.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I never even thought about like like you have someone who has to pay or you have these assets and it's like, yeah, God forbid someone passes away in the middle. I have a lot of clients too who don't record those. They forget. I think like their divorce, it's done, they put everything away and they forget that all the homework really comes after the fact. Like there's all these things that need to be done.
Hmm.
And I know I talked to a lot of people about estate planning after divorce, like just as a reminder, like you need, and they're like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. I can't do one more thing. And the after stuff is so important.
Yeah, it is. Like you just said, I mean, there's even more urgency when it comes to wills because when you get a divorce or a judgment of separate maintenance, there's nothing like just getting a divorce doesn't automatically change who, if you have life insurance, like who the beneficiaries are or,
Right.
who's getting what in your will. Like you have to actively go make those changes again. Otherwise, or, if they were on your bank accounts and stuff like that, and they're the only people on your bank accounts, like you'll have to change that to a different loved one, likely, unless if you're getting along with your ex and you're okay with them being the executor. It just depends on every situation. But Yeah, so those are all things that you really have to get done sooner rather than you can't delay it. Maybe, not saying that people who get divorced when they're younger don't have not
Accident.
like something could happen to them, but it's less likely. But yeah,
Right,
so
your
there is
statistics are in your favor.
I mean,
When
how
you're younger.
when you're helping people, apply for mortgages and stuff for homes, like likely they won't have to, at that age, and there isn't a mortgage, or maybe they do because they have to pay out their significant other, their ex-significant other. I mean, when you're looking at those numbers and they're both retired, is it harder?
It depends. I think it depends just on where is the income coming from. So a lot of people think because they're older, they can't get a mortgage because their life expectancy isn't 30 years and they get a third, but we cannot discriminate for age. So that's like a big myth that a lot of people think. But if they have income from Social Security, from pension, from assets, and it's enough income to qualify them for the loan document, then they're good to go. And then there's reverse mortgages also for the older community where you don't really need to qualify. You just have to have the equity in your home. So there are some other options for elder people. You only have to be 55 to get a reverse mortgage, so not even that old in today's day and right.
Right? Yeah, it's like AARP special, like
Right, right. Yeah, because it's like, oh, what used to be old is not really so old anymore. Do you find that you ever work with, I always hear like, I don't want to get divorced until my kids are older or they're out of the house. Um, do you see a lot of people that say, okay, everyone's out of the house, I'm ready to do this now?
Yeah, and that's another issue with gray divorce, right? Because let's say that, both parties, when they were married, had agreed to help pay for the child's education. But once your child is, legally an adult, child support doesn't have to be awarded. It's not really an argument. However, that doesn't prevent people from negotiating certain things. And part of that could be payment for child's college or books or housing or something, and that could be put into a divorce decree. Um, so there's that kind of scenario where maybe they're out of the house, but you still want to take care of them and you want to make sure that, your ex follows through with their promise. However, there's also the issue of you're getting divorced. Now you're having to pay for two households and you simply do not have the money to pay for, a portion of college or anything like that. So, the interesting thing with gray divorce is, you may be waiting for your children to become adults or out of the house, but a lot of the times adult children become pretty involved in divorce cases, more involved than you would kind of think, but it impacts them even though they're out of the house, whether it's, now that they have to have multiple holidays instead, multiple Thanksgivings, or they are now no longer getting that college fund that they thought that they were going to get. So um, that's that's kind of an issue in gray divorce, and when clients are um, you know I'd say closer to their 70s and 80s and 90s, when physical and mental health may be in question. There's always the concern of not so much elder abuse, but control by the adult children that may be inappropriate. So children are impacted and they can be impactful, whether for positive or negative reasons. So
I could see
um,
that.
that's a concern. And kind of going with like the mental and physical health, like I've had when I first started practice, I had a client who was 86 years old and she just wanted to be done.
Wow.
They had been living separately for over a decade in two separate houses, and there really wasn't a reason for her to get divorced other than she was just done. And I tried talking her out of it, but the other part is when a client reaches a certain point, you do And the other side like raises issues of mental health. Your attorney may ask you to go through some sort of examination, whether it's with their primary care provider or getting like some sort of other psychological evaluation to make sure that you are of sound mind to make these legal decisions.
Interesting.
So, and if they're not, and the other party wants a divorce, your attorney may have to ask you to hire an attorney to apply for a guardianship, so
Oh,
somebody
goodness.
can make those decisions for you. So there's sometimes an extra layer that has to be done just to protect people's rights, that they're not being taken advantage of and that kind of thing. So
At least there's something out there, right? Because I could see where people could get taken advantage of.
yeah, definitely. So, those are kind of unique considerations. Spousal support too. Cases where when you hear about like long-term spousal support cases, those are people who've been married forever. There's been a giant disparity of income. Um, and they're elderly, like there's no chance of them really like hitting the ground running and getting a great career at starting at 60. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's not as likely as if you're 30, 40 years old. And the other party could argue, well, they got their undergraduate degree in teaching, so they could just go back to teaching. I'm sorry, there's not a school that's going to hire you, likely. Maybe at best you'll be a substitute teacher at this point in time.
Right, right.
So,
It's true. It makes it so hard.
right. So, spousal support, it's meant for a couple of different purposes. When you're younger, it may be used to get you back on your feet, but when you're older, it's to make sure that, you don't end up destitute. If there's been that kind of disparity of income. So that's when you see the larger or longer, sometimes even lifetime spousal support awards.
That makes sense. Or maybe even I bet sometimes you're still the beneficiary on someone's life insurance.
Right. And sometimes you keep those as part of negotiations. So that's kind of interesting, but um I had like a whole list of things to, of stats and whatnot. But yeah, gray divorce, it is becoming more common. Which is weird because we're in a time when divorce is actually in the decline. And I didn't know this, but in 2020, less people had actually filed for divorce than other previous years when they started, taking count of this. So,
Wow,
and I'm
20,
guessing it's just because you're stuck or people didn't have jobs or, I don't know why, but.
right. I wonder if it's because people are getting married later
Hmm.
and now you already have that two income household, right? So you have more independence as opposed to the women who couldn't work and couldn't own property and now they're getting divorced or I don't know. I mean, even when I was younger and got married, like the man always, made the income and the woman was looked at a little funny if she went to work, but she still has to take care of the household. And,
Oh, yeah.
the dynamics change as you get older, but I feel like people who are getting married now, they have more equal dynamics.
Yeah, that's it feels that way in a lot of cases, and I've also seen a lot of people who come in and they're like, "Well, we kept all of our finances separate. Doesn't that mean, that we just keep it?" I'm like, "Well, if they agree to that, that's fine. But if they're not going to agree to it, then no."
Yeah, people
So,
get very confused. We all need pre-marriage class.
right. Yeah. That would be helpful. What not to do with your student loans, or if your significant other took out student loans for trips to Disney and stuff like that for the family. But yeah, so there is, I do think that is the difference, is that there seems to be at least fiscally more equality between, parties now. And more education also helps, it limits, or not limits, but reduces the chance of divorce. But yeah, I mean, with the gray divorce, most of them, there's a giant income disparity. I've even seen it in cases where like they no longer want to take care of it's just too much for them health wise, and they just don't want to do it anymore. And it in
It's
ways, people are like, oh, that's so selfish, but um it's, it's a personal choice, and maybe that's something. I've had parties who've discussed it and they're like, no, I want, my ex to go live a life because they're a lot healthier than me, and I don't want them having to take care of me like that. So I have seen that. I've also seen people trying to commit fraud for purposes, and I have to kick them out of my office
or
because
Medicaid or something.
correct. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I can't help. I'm not going to be involved in that, and they're pretty open about what they're trying to do. So,
I don't think a lot of people know it's fraud. When I first heard about it, I didn't know it was a fraud thing. I learned that later. So I don't know how many people know that that's wrong.
yeah. So I don't know. That one's tough because you understand why they're doing it, but you can't, as a lawyer, like I could lose my license if I help you do that. So,
Right, right. You gotta be careful.
right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and it's like it makes you wonder when is it legal versus when is it illegal to do something like that if you have someone who's sick.
Right, and that's when I would send you to like a Medicaid, Medicare, like, one of those insurance attorneys, because then they can help
And
you.
then maybe they'll send you back.
Right, yeah, yeah, no, they can get divorced, you're fine, as long as I get the clearing from them. But
Right.
um,
That makes sense. Yeah, there's all these very strange things that you don't really think about that need to be thought about. And I think that's always the bottom line, right? You need to talk to professionals because you don't know what you don't know and you're not even thinking about things that you don't know.
right, yep, and or, with like retirement accounts and that kind of thing, like when you are degree divorced, you're likely going to have a more limited income coming in. And, you need to figure out what that's going to look like. Like if you do divorce, like will you both be able to survive? And that's
Right.
been an issue in some of my cases. Like GM offered early outs for a lot of people and they retired at 45 thinking like this is a great deal,
Wow.
and people, taking care of themselves or not are, that's 45 is really young to just stop working. And so
It
we
is
run into
really
that
young.
issue where we have two people who want to get divorced and, together they were maybe at the poverty line. And then, when they're getting divorced, it's like, I hope you have somebody to take care of you, so that's a concern too
So
sometimes.
sad
Yeah.
and scary, right? It's just scary for
It is
people.
scary. Yeah. So,
It's
yeah,
true.
so
Any
a lot of the issues, they're just, it's health, which is a lot of the time it's how are you going to pay for the health? And then it's retirement and how are you going to afford the rest of your life? And just other things like that are all related to that. So at the end of the day, it's like how can you manage this? And that's really any divorce, but this one it's um you don't really have a chance to like go out and have another life usually at an
right,
individual.
you don't have time to save up a bunch of money or start another job or anything else.
All right.
Wow. This was really interesting, and I thank you so much for explaining it and talking to me about it so people can learn. If anyone wanted to get a hold of you that's listening, what's the best way to do that?
Phone number, which is a pretty easy number. It's 810-238-8330, or my email is attorneywilling@gmail.com.
And without the S, willing, no S.
No S. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I so appreciate you doing this.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm Carri Goldring, and if you ever have any questions regarding mortgage, feel free to give me a call or send me a text message, 248-420-4524. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.